listening to East County Magazine's Bookshelf. We interview creative minds and share their ideas. Here's your host, Anat Tour.
Today, it is my honor to introduce Gus Lee, an American author and ethicist. Lee attended the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and obtained his JD degree from the UC Davis School of Law. Lee has an impressive career, serving as a supervising deputy district attorney, acting deputy attorney general, FBI and law enforcement trainer, and deputy director of the California District Attorneys Association. He was West Point's chair of character development. Gus Lee is a best-selling author with many notable books, and today it is my privilege to discuss his book, China Boy, which became San Francisco's first one city, one book selection. Gus, I am thrilled to have you on the show.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for the honor of the invitation. I've enjoyed meeting you offline before we started.
Likewise. So I have a few questions for you. In China Boy, you've shared a deeply personal and autobiographical account of your childhood. What inspired you to write this story, and what motivated you to present it as a work of autobiographical fiction?
Great question. I was not destined by conventional criteria to become a novelist or an author in English, my academic English being my third language. But our daughter, when she was 7, asked me about her missing grandmother. And that was my mother. And I had to admit to her that I couldn't tell her anything about my mommy, who had died when I was 5. And I had grown up or struggled to survive and without a single memory or impression of who my mother was. When I was tucking our daughter to bed that night, she said, "How could you forget your mommy?" And I realized I had no answer. I, who could do second grade arithmetic and every basket I shot at the short bucket went in. I knew all the answers, but I didn't know this one. So I researched who my mother was with my 3 older sisters and felt compelled to write it up as a journal for our 7-year-old daughter and our 5-year-old son. And when I reached the point at which my mother died, I kept writing because I wanted our kids to know what it was like for their dad growing up when I was their age in a very, very different set of circumstances. When I realized, against all odds, that this journal was going to get published, I rapidly changed all the names, and I had already taken out the worst parts of the story because I knew our kids would someday read it. And shock upon shock, it became a bestseller, a national bestseller. And after 32 years, it remains in print and still being used in schools.
Well, I could certainly see why it's a bestseller. I mean, I couldn't put the book down, and you are such a creative writer. The book sometimes made me laugh and brought me to tears at the same time because there were very moving and touching and sad moments. As you talk about your mother, I recall that when his mother somehow disappeared, and all he had was a slight memory of her. So that resonates to me in the book when I was reading it.
Yeah.
Throughout your book, you describe so vividly San Francisco. What were some of the big contrasts between 1950s San Francisco and today's San Francisco?
Yeah, that's such a profound question. There are so many positives versus negatives. But I'll talk about the ones that I think have the greatest genuine impact on kids, because this is written from the perspective of a child's experience. In 1950s San Francisco, the population was heavily influenced by 15 million American men and women who had just returned from World War II. We lost nearly 500,000 dead of our youngest and finest people. And these adults had returned from war with a sense of renewed purpose and a sense of being delivered in a way because they had survived. And so in the 1950s San Francisco, there were construction workers and sewer workers and truck drivers and YMCA boxing instructors and gym instructors who could earn a living wage and live in San Francisco and the peninsula and East Bay on a blue collar wage. Just regular people could do regular jobs, and they would work 9 to 5, Monday, Friday. They wouldn't work at night. They didn't have to take 3 jobs. They didn't work on the weekends. And, gas was 20 cents a gallon or whatever. A lot of people didn't have cars. There was very, municipal railway provided all the transportation you needed in the city. In many ways still does. And there just wasn't any economic pressure on regular people. Now, I've been a corporate C-level twice, a chief operating officer. I've been a government senior executive. I've received positions and compensation far beyond what I merit. But I know from being dirt poor as a kid and as an adolescent and being a soldier when you're very poor, they didn't pay like they do now, versus really having solid compensation. It doesn't matter where you are in San Francisco today, it's hard. If you're very wealthy, it's hard. If you're very poor, it's hard. And if you're in the middle, it's hard. And 1950s, it wasn't. And I miss that time. I really do, where really good people could serve youth and make a living. Now you can't.
I recall, as you're mentioning, in the 1950s, as a 7-year-old boy, you got on the bus, and the first thing I said, wait a minute, 7 on the bus by himself? That's the first thing that came to my mind. And all I said, oh no, he's going to get mugged. You were on the way to the YMCA. So I just look back and think, like, today, I don't think any parent would put their 7-year-old on a bus to go anywhere. So just that was a different time, time period and time, the way of thinking. The book portrays the challenges Kai faces as a young American Chinese boy in a predominantly African-American neighborhood. How closely did the novel track the actual events of your life?
Well, Anat, it began as a journal based only on fact. Most of it in the beginning based on the reporting of my older sisters. The 2 eldest being old enough technically to have been my biological mother. There was that much of an age gap. So they were much more cognizant of what was going on when I was a blind, sickly little kid, being largely unconscious about what was going on in this new land. So it began with, I would say, journalistic accuracy, with assiduous attention to fact. I mentioned this, that my father had a real problem with rage and depression, and was violent. And his second wife, who came into my life when I was 6, was even more abusive. My father was still alive when I wrote the journal, and he had already been terrifying our children and we had to keep them separated because of his violence and his anger. And I didn't want our kids to know the full horror story. So the lack of accuracy was by omission, and by some fabrication. I wrote my father up as being an okay guy who just was absent, and I largely omitted his second wife from the story, who appears as Edna. Her real name was Edith. And again, when it turned out to be that by Providence, I got the best literary agent in the world in New York, and Penguin and Simon and Schuster and New American Library bid against each other in an auction to buy this book from an unknown author who had no writing background, never been in a writing program, went to engineering and law. I mean, not anything that prepares a novelist necessarily. I changed everything. I changed the names, and I softened my father even further. I did put my stepmother into the story, but toned down by 80%. So if she seems unfair, malicious, sadistic, it's only a hint of who in reality this person was.
Yeah, I want to say first of all on the comment that you meant how you didn't have any background in writing or you didn't take any classes, but to me, I mean, you're a natural talent. It's just like an artist who's naturally talented at art, and you don't really shape or mold them in a certain way. And I find that you have this genuine style of writing that is yours. But as you're talking about Edna, Kai's stepmother, she's portrayed as a very abusive character in the story. How did you approach portraying Kai's stepmother, and how has that impacted your life?
Boy, that's a profound question for me. Here I am, a double senior citizen, and the memories. I definitely have a systematic negative memory impact from having spent 11 years with her. And despite the YMCA saving me and fundamentally raising me 6 days a week from the age of 7 until I went into the Army, she became, I mean, she's Ursula the Octopus. She's Vlad the Impaler. She's Stalin. The monster, not under the bed and not in the closet, but who is in your room and shadows you into the bathroom. I mean, it's really pretty terrible. So I give a great deal of thanks to Providence, which gave me the ability to recover memory and put it into writing. And there's not a catharsis. There's not a free, not a liberation, but there is more what we would call today agency over my past by putting it into writing. And by writing about her, I actually received an ironic, paradoxical sort of authority over her. By telling the truth about her, muted as it was, she became less terrifying in memory. But I have tremendous sympathy for children who were not raised with love and in safety, which unfortunately is probably the majority of kids in America today, because it's uphill. And if you don't get a Toussaint in your life, my first friend, if you don't get a Coach Tony, a Coach Pinoy, and a Coach Bobby, who teach you how to defend yourself and what's right in the world, and to be generous to others when you have nothing and they have very little, it's awful going. And so I just lift up those kids I lift up everyone who seeks to help them, and I give them tremendous kudos from the heart. Don't give up, stick with them. I was not a worthy kid. My coaches stuck with me despite my absolute lack of promise. And they made me into a productive citizen and someone who could be a father and a husband.
Really resonates with me to what you say about kids or children now today that are probably suffering and being abused in their households. And it's tragic, really, that this happens, but we know it does. And when we see a child that hurts, it's probably or hurting, it's because they are hurt.
Yes.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
I think, not, and I'm very proud of you as a mom, and I salute you.
Thank you.
In these times, let me back up. Think of 1950s. My coaches had been in extended, furious, merciless combat with an unforgiving, stubborn, fight to the death enemy in World War II. And they saw, in one case, one of the coaches saw all of his friends killed, every one of them. They all had, we didn't call it PTSD, but they're all shell shocked. They all had trauma. It all happened to them when they were young. Yet they selflessly gave to others. And there's just a generosity of that time. Certainly there was racism, there was bigotry, there was unfairness against women, but there was just this atmospheric sense that we'd all do better and we're going to help each other and we're not going to attack each other. We may be discriminatory, but we're not going to, this is San Francisco, we're not going to harm people. And so I'm saying that people who were damaged by the most cataclysmic war in human history were able to be generous. And for whoever's, your loyal listeners and others who are signed into your reporting, I want to remind them that spark of courage, of resilience, of endurance exists in us all. I'm a recovering coward, and I know what it's like to quit and to feel like quitting and to feel despair in the world. Don't give into it. My coaches didn't, and as a consequence, I don't. You can be Coach Tony. You can be Coach Pinoy, Coach Bobby. You can be Toussaint. You can be Toussaint's mom, Mrs. Collins, and be generous to these kids who, so a very narrow window when we can help them before cynicism and fear take over. Everyone's hurting. And when we recognize other people's pain, we become leaders as opposed to victims.
Yes, we need to have empathy. And I see in the back of you, it says courage. So yes. The book examines into Kai's journey to reconnect with his Chinese cultural identity through studying Chinese philosophy and spending time with his uncle Shim. Could you share more about the significance of cultural identity in the story?
Boy, if that isn't the American narrative, right? Everyone's an immigrant or related to an immigrant, and except Native Americans. And as I've studied ethnography, even the Native Americans, the first people, probably came from mainland Asia, crossed the Bering Straits into what we call Alaska, came through Canada, populated all the Americas. They were immigrants too. And it's very hard to find the original people on an original continent. So our original culture is really important. It has features that are vital to knowing who we are and where we came from. There's so many things I love about America. If we hadn't been given sanctuary in America during World War II, I never would have been born. My mother and sisters would have died. 20 million Chinese died in World War II. And those who were fortunate enough to make it to the United States survived. So original culture coming from Uncle Shim in the novel. In real life, his name was S.Y. Shen. He was a Chinese scholar. He was a Princeton graduate, and he remembered his Chinese roots down to the bottom. And he, commissioned by my mother, did his level best to convey to me Confucian, Taoist, internal, essential Chinese culture as much as a little kid could understand it. And I really treasure him. I treasure the time he spent with me. I treasure his lessons. What's great about America is if I were a complete Confucian, a total committed Confucian, I would read the world based on social rank. And I would admire only firstborn sons. If we encountered hard economic times, I would consider ditching our daughters, getting rid of them. So there are parts of the original culture that I'm very glad I don't have to adhere to. But there are other parts, wisdom parts, that are very translatable and extremely useful today.
Absolutely. Well, this question is one that I actually wanted to ask already before. So Kai's friendship with Toussaint is a significant part of the narrative. How much of the real Toussaint did you present, and do you know where he is today? And if he read China Boy, do you know how he reacted?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. There's no way in a book in which my family and my experiences at the YMCA of going from cowardice to courage can do justice to Toussaint. So who is Toussaint Street? Toussaint LaRue in the novel. When I was at my absolute lowest, which is to say I was being literally pounded into the concrete by the primary bully of the neighborhood, and I was hopeless, and I was bleeding, and I was hurting, and I wanted to die. I was 6 years old. A kid scraped me off the concrete, dusted me off, and became my first friend in life. And his name was Toussaint. And I hope that came through. I hope his goodness, his matchless kindness from a tough street fighter who had nothing to gain in social coin in the hood by touching, much less befriending, the China boy, the helpless, sad sack who couldn't fight, speak, play sports, or even run for his life. This helpless non-kid. And that's who he is today. Can you pretend he didn't grow up in an inner city ghetto with terrible chances, in poverty, inadequate nutrition, etc. But someone with a great heart, and with a beautiful heart and a beautiful mind. If there's any justice in the world, what would that person do as an adult, as a profession? What would he do? What would you think? What job would you give him?
Well, honestly, I'm surprised if at all he would survive that time period. As I was reading the book, I was also surprised if Kai would survive because it was so rough. But what would he do as a profession? A boxer? No.
Yeah.
Someone a coach of some sort.
Yeah, coach is close. Anat, he is a family practice physician. He's a medical doctor.
Wow.
And he spent the first part of his career in the San Francisco Free Clinic taking care of the poor. And he only joined an HMO when his own child needed medical care, for which he did not have insurance. So he joined a very good HMO and still works for them today. We lost contact with each other. We each presumed, like you, that the other had died. And it was actually my wife, Diane, who found Toussaint. It's a miracle story all by itself. And so we were reunited after not seeing each other since we were early teens. We're now in our 40s. We reunited in the Bay Area, and our kids played together. And Toussaint said, to finally answer your question, he loved the book. Chapter 9 is about him, because he said he was able to recover his childhood in a positive framework. And what a favor to be able to return anything good to this magnificent individual whose generosity, he's the biblical Good Samaritan. Everyone else walked by my supine body on McAllister Street, bleeding. I'd been beaten up and stuffed into garbage cans. I'd been thrown into alleys. I'd been left on sidewalks, schoolyards, street corners, stoops of steps, a lot of places where I would fall helpless after being beaten. And only one person of all the adults and all the kids and all the teens in the neighborhood, a 6-year-old kid named Toussaint, is the one who said, okay, I'm going to take care of this poor guy. And I mean, one in a million, maybe 1 in 10 million.
Very moving. I'm so happy you had a Toussaint in your life. And
Yes.
I wish for all kids that are suffering to have someone like him or her.
Right. And that's the point, isn't it? Not each of us can be Toussaint.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I when San Francisco named China Boy, the book we're discussing, as the One City, One Book selection, I did a round robin of San Francisco high schools and gave talks. And I won't name the school, but it's a inner city school. I would say with probably 5% Anglo student body. And I gave a talk on courage, and there was in the gym, and there was warm applause. I thought I had done well, and I hadn't wasted their time, and given them some go do some action steps to lessen their fears and overcome their fears and practice courage. But unfortunately, after the assembly, there was a big fight in the central hallway, and the adults ran away from the fight, and I became Toussaint. So I waded through the crowd of kids, and there was a guy who looked like he should play for the Niners or the Raiders, or an NFL pro, very big human being, just punching this poor smaller kid in the head, in the temple, in the jaw, on the chin. These are deadly blows. He knew how to punch, and his victim didn't know how to take a punch. Didn't know how to, bob and weave or parry or block or defend himself. He had no guard. Was going to get killed or suffer permanent brain injury. And because Toussaint's in my life, and because I'd gone to West Point, and I'd been trained by YMCA boxers, I'd been in the Army, I just went in and I picked up this guy who outweighed me. the assailant and carried him out of the school, put him down on the sidewalk. And I said, you know, you're so big and strong. You're the guy who should be protecting that squirt that you were pounding. It didn't work. He was angry at me for interrupting the fight. And he gave me some choice words that were not, thank you, wise old man, for your wisdom. I will write this down and not harm small people again. That's not what he said. But that ability, I'm a native coward who have, I can show my life is proof that one can be courageous by practice, not by nature. So we're all Tucson's, but only if we choose to be. And we tell ourselves, yes, I can help others, as opposed to I want someone to come help me. My mentor at West Point, H.M. Schwarzkopf, said, when you help someone to the top of the peak, you can't help but end up there yourself.
I love that. Speaking about violence and fighting, boxing plays a prominent role in Kai's transformation. Could you elaborate on the symbolism of boxing in the story and its connection to masculinity and identity?
Happy to. Wonderful question. So boxing, I discovered as someone who loves basketball and football, gymnastics. I discovered boxing has its own unique ethos, and it's not gender particular. Boxing is a way to overcome fear of physical pain, fear of failure, fear of conflict, fear of embarrassment, fear of humiliation, and even fear of death. That's a pretty powerful sport. And mentioning masculinity, guys, it's a scientific fact, we have a lot of testosterone. And if that testosterone isn't channeled into hard labor, like farming or taking dishes or sports, it will be used in maladaptive ways. It'll be used in violence. So for guys, young street kids, like as I was, and 1,000 other guys who went through the Y boxing programs, it was a way for us to channel our aggression. And you learn something very quickly. It really hurts to get hit. You talked about empathy. You get empathy for people you would otherwise pick on. You go, hey, that doesn't feel very good. It's a real lesson for bullies. I was not a bully, but I realized even I could hurt another human being. And boxing gives you that keen awareness. It allows you to defend yourself. It's not a way of beating up someone. Mm-hmm. That's not boxing. It's defending yourself. And it's doing it according to extremely strict rules of sportsmanship. So boys who would otherwise be chaotic, incoherent, and violent learn to channel their hormones into a sport that teaches them respect every second they're in the ring and allows them to defend themselves. And then the Y program turns around and has you train younger kids. So you realize this is not a gift just for you. It's a gift for everyone. The other thing that happens with boxing is almost every one of the preparatory exercises and skill practices is unattractive. I love basketball. I love dribbling. I like passing. I like assists. I like layups. I like jumpers, foul shots, and shooting from the top of the key. It's all fun. Playing one-on-one is fun. Running laps, lifting weights, hitting speed bags and body bags and jitter bags is not fun. Getting hit is not fun. So you learn to accommodate discomfort, which I think is one of the great lessons for adulthood. Too many of us get stopped because it's uncomfortable. Well, life is hard. Life is discomfort. And it becomes worse if we don't find competence in what's there. So boxing does all that. It even teaches you moral fortitude and courage by going through the training process that is innately not fun.
Yeah, sounds like it requires a lot of discipline, and it's a lot of your mind is at work too, not just physical. Which in the book, I recall little Kai fighting Big Willie, and it's like David and Goliath. And you managed to overcome that and get stronger. So almost in a sense, boxing saved you.
Totally. The relationship with my coaches, the love, the care I got from them sustained my life, my inner life, my desire to live and not end my life. The skills they taught me allowed me to survive on hard streets. And, once I learned how to fight, I didn't have to fight again. I
Mhm.
mean, it happened, but I was being beaten sometimes multiple times a day until I learned to defend myself, until I stopped being a victim. So once I learned boxing, it did save my life relationally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. And I owe it a great deal. And when I went in the Army, I kept boxing, not because I loved it, but because I felt the obligation to show what I had learned through 10 years of the boxing program in San Francisco as a kid, to teach it to other Army boxers. I had a very good system. I was given a very good boxing system. And you're right. It's called the sweet science. There's a lot of science to boxing. You have to think about what you're doing and merge it into instinct by practice, like piano, like parenting.
Yes. The book explores themes of bullying, resilience, and the search for acceptance. How did these themes impact your life and the experiences of others in similar situations?
I've become, as a consequence of receiving the charity of others, a real advocate for equipping others to be courageous. You see the title behind. So if I have a métier, it's not writing novels. Um, as enjoyable as that is, it's really equipping people to overcome their fears and to replace fearful reactions that we've embedded since infancy and childhood, unfortunately. So we become fearful, full of fear. It's okay to feel fear, but fear is what we feel, but courage is what we should do. And so it's informed my whole life work. My coaches, Coach Tony and primarily, trained me to be courageous when I felt cowardly, to stand my ground without anger, calmly, instead of crying, screaming, blaming the world, and running away. Because those are life habits, either to the left or the right. And courage is learnable. So this, small book that was written so many years ago, um, in a way, pointed out my life work, which was not learning courage and bravery through standing in the ring and boxing your opponent for 9 minutes, but instead facing your internal Goliaths, your fears that would otherwise control how you live and how you treat others. And having overcome your fears, practicing the behaviors of courage as you would practice music or sports until you become competent at it. You have courage abilities, courage competence, and then you're in position to extend that to others. It's the greatest gift that I could give to my family. If we were as poor, unable to pay bills, to buy food as my family of origin was, but my father had taught me moral courage, I would have been a very lucky kid. if he had been a multimillionaire and we had every luxury in the world, and he taught me comfort, I couldn't have had a worse childhood.
Very moving. Kai's journey is courageous in a sense, filled with both triumphs and challenges. Can you share some of the most emotionally significant moments for you in the story?
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's such a sweet question, and that love is really what we live for. And I'm not talking about romantic love, but love of others, respecting others, and love of what's good. So in Tucson, a 6-year-old, I'm a 6-year-old sickly Chinese kid, and I've seen, my neighborhood is filled with Black people. There are no other Chinese, and here a Black kid is touching me, but he's not hitting me. That never happened before. And he's pulling me up, and I figured it was to torture me and get me to stand up so he can knock me down. And I don't know if I conveyed it, if it came through the writing, but the sense, I left it to the reader to feel the sense of wonder that this kid, this child, had achieved the pinnacle of moral development in a place of profound poverty, material poverty. Material poverty, but this was a multi-gazillionaire kid in moral value and moral principles. I'm alive today and not because Toussaint did that so selflessly, at sacrifice to himself. Ditto my coaches, who were repelled by my fear of everything. I did not want to be in a boxing program. I didn't like white people. I didn't like any people. I didn't like Chinese people. They weren't very good to me either, except for my mother, and I didn't remember her. So I didn't like any people. I didn't like to be touched, and I was in a boxing program, and all I did was cry. And the coaches, Coach Tony says, "Ah, kid, you make me want to cry." And I was the one who was crying. They had love, not for me, they didn't know who I was. I didn't know they were. They had love for people, and particularly for kids in need. And people like that have been, to include my wife of Diane of 44 years, her family, members of my family, they're certainly our kids. That's what life is about. And I'm here because it was given to me when I thought I would get none of it. But it's out there, it's available, it's inside each of our hearts. We think in our worst times that we have nothing to give, and we're waiting for rescue. The rescue is we help others. That's the rescue.
I 100% agree. And speaking about Tucson again, I believe when you were talking in the book, his mother seemed very loving too. So I'm happy he received love and he was able to give that back.
Absolutely. Yeah, he shared his mother. So I had two mother figures in my life, in my childhood. One was his mother, and the other was, in the book, she's called Angie Costello. She ran the cafe, Mezzanine Cafe in the Central Y. Her real name was Lola's Cafe. And she fed me out of her own generosity. Yeah, so Toussaint, so much of his strength came from his mother.
Gus, I want to express my sincere gratitude for joining me on the show today. It has been an incredible honor to have you share your insights and experiences. Your book, China Boy, which I'll show everyone, left a profound impact on me, and I felt truly empowered and moved. Thank you for creating a work that transcends time.
Oh, you're very kind, Anat. Thank you for the honor of sharing time with you. I've really enjoyed our time together. I appreciate your insights. I appreciate your courage and strengths, and admire really everything you're doing. So just make it a courageous day. And thank you for the privilege of sharing time with you.
Thank you. Likewise. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye, Anat.
Bye.